Dice are one of my favorite components in board games. I love rolling them, I love the randomness that they can inject into otherwise purely strategic games, and I really enjoy games where you use dice in interesting and unexpected ways. Today on Game On Video Reviews, we'll be looking at a game where you use dice to build a city, trade goods, and even attack bandits. So let's roll the bones and take a closer look at Dice City. So here's the setup for Dice City. You'll notice in the middle here there's a rather large board here, and this oddly is not a central player board. This is an individual player board, and the game comes with 4 of these large folding boards, and every player is going to get one of those to represent their city. So you'll set that up for each player. Each player is also going to get 5 dice, one of each of these 5 colors. Next to the board, you'll also set up the 3 decks of harvest locations and the regular army deck. And then there'll be piles of resource tokens for each of the 3 resources in the game: wood, iron, and stone. Then you'll lay out the 3 piles of trade ships and the 3 piles of bandit cards. And you'll be taking these during the game to get victory points, and this will also kind of act as the timer for the end game. Somewhere in a central location, you'll want to put out a pile of victory point tokens, a pile of deactivation tokens, and a pile of pass tokens. Finally, there's a large location deck of cards, which you'll shuffle up and lay out 8 cards in a row that will form the market of locations for the game. Now, the final step of setup is for each player to take their 5 dice and roll them, and then they're going to place them onto their board in the appropriate locations. The board has 5 rows, 1 for each color die, and 6 columns, 1 for each number that might be on the die. So for example, I have a 6 white. I'll go to the white row and place it on the 6. So you'll do this with all of your dice, and then you're going to always start off your turn with dice on the board, and then you will use them during the course of your turn. So let's take a look at a turn in Dice City. The first thing that you do in your turn in Dice City is to use the dice that are already on your board. And the first thing you can do with a die is you can remove a die from a space to do whatever that space says. So in this case, this space says that I would get a stone resource. So I'd remove the die and I would get a stone resource from the supply. That's the first thing that you can do. The second thing is that you can remove a die from a space in order to move a different die to an adjacent space on that particular row. So I could remove this yellow die, and then I would be able to, for example, move this die either left or right. So that would allow me to perform a different action than the one that I rolled. That's the second thing that you can do with your dice. The third thing you can do with your dice is this row of cards up here, the location deck. If you don't like the cards that are in that deck, you can discard a die from your board to remove 4 of these cards and then replace them. So that's kind of a way to wipe out locations that you don't particularly like and get a better market to choose from. The next option you have with your dice is to reactivate a space that has been deactivated. Once you get some cards on the board, which we'll talk about in a second, they might have abilities on them that require you to deactivate a space. And so it would have this deactivation token on it. You can't use that space again until it's been reactivated. So one of the things you can do is to remove a die from your board to be able to remove that deactivation token, so that would allow you to use this card again on a later turn. The last thing you can do with the die, if you don't like any of the other options, is you can remove the die and gain a pass token. And then these pass tokens can be turned in later for resources and things like that. So if you turn in 2 pass tokens, you can get a resource of your choice. You can actually use this to force other players to re-roll one of their dice. Or you can add 1 to your army value, which we'll talk about army in just a second. So if you don't like any of the options on the spaces on your board where your dice are, pass tokens might be a good option to be able to get you some of the things that you need. So those are the 5 things you can do with your dice, and once you've used all the dice on your board, then you're going to move on to the attack step. The next step in your turn is the attack step, and that's when you're going to use army values. You'll notice that there are these red spaces on the board, and if you have dice there that you've removed to use these spaces, you're going to be adding value to your army, and it was represented by a sword. And so once you have enough army value, and that total is high enough, then you can attack one of these bandit cards here. And the bandits have a shield value, and that shield value is what you have to equal or beat in army values to be able to take this card. And so if you have a army value of 3, then this bandit that's a shield value of 3, you can just take that and put it in a face down pile on your player area, and that's going to be worth points at the end of the game. The other thing that you can use army for is to attack another player. Now, the basic board here doesn't have any locations that can be attacked, but once you get some other locations out on the board through the build step that we'll talk about in a second, some of these locations have victory point values associated with them and have shield values as well so that they can be defended. You'll notice that this card has a victory point value of 1 and a shield value of 3. So if a player used an army value of 3 to attack this location, then that player would get this number of victory points, and then they would be allowed to put a deactivation token onto this card on their opponent's board. So the card doesn't go away, but it does get deactivated, which can slow your opponent down. And so then you would get these victory points in tokens right away. After the attack step is the building and trade step, and this is where you're really going to be customizing your board and kind of turning it into the dice city that you want to turn it into. There are these locations here called harvests, which are sort of upgraded versions of the resource spaces that are already on the board. So this space here will give you 1 iron, but if you build a mine, then that's going to give you 2 iron. And so all you do is build by spending the resources and tokens that are on the top right of the card, and then you're just going to place that down on a location on your board. And it can be in any location that you want. It doesn't have to be the same color. You can cover up, whatever you want and design your city however you'd like to. But whenever a die gets rolled and put on that card, then you can use that new upgraded ability. There's also regular army cards, which are built with 2 iron as well, that are kind of an upgraded army. Your base army will add 1 sword. These regular army cards will add 2 swords. In addition to that, you have this row of locations here, which are greatly upgraded things that do all kinds of different stuff. Add to your army, allow you to re-roll dice, get you resources and benefits, all that kind of stuff. And so you can purchase those and place them onto your board as well. You can buy as many cards as you can afford. And then the other thing that you can do with your resources is you can use the trade ships. That's these cards down here. And by trading in a certain number of resources, you can get the victory points that are associated with that. So this one requires 2 of each resource and will give you 5 victory points, which you'll just then take and put into a pile with all of your other cards that are giving you points. This one requires 3 of each resource, and then there's 1 card here that requires 4 of each resource. That is very, very difficult to get. The reason is because after this step is over with, at the end of your turn, you're only allowed to have a maximum of 1 of each kind of resource, and anything that's in excess you have to discard. So it's real hard to get some of those bigger trade ships. This is also a timer for the game. When 2 out of these 3 trade ship piles are depleted, then that's also going to signal the end of the game. The last step of your turn is very simple. You're going to discard down to 1 of each resource, at a maximum of 1 of each resource, and then you're going to take all 5 of your dice at the end of your turn, and you're going to roll them and place them onto the board. So you're placing your dice at the end of your turn, so you pretty much have all the way up until the beginning of your next turn to decide what you're going to do with your dice. And so that is a turn in Dice City. The game is going to continue until one of 3 things happens. Either the trade ship piles, 2 of them run out, all of the bandit piles run out, or if the location deck runs out of cards, which that's a pretty big deck of cards. I'm not sure if I would ever play a game where that would happen. That seems pretty unlikely. But those are the 3 ways that the game can end. You'll play an equal number of turns, and then you'll do final scoring. In final scoring, you're going to take and add up the value of all of your victory point tokens that you may have collected through various spaces on the board and things like that. You'll add up the points from your trade ships and from your bandits. And then any of the cards that you bought from the location pile that have victory point values associated with them, you're going to add those points as well. Whoever has the largest number of points is the winner of Dice City. So let me start off by saying that I really do enjoy the mechanics in this game. I love rolling the dice and placing them onto the board, onto your city board, and then being able to use dice to manipulate other dice to be able to get the actions that you want. In dice games, sometimes you can sort of fall victim to randomness if there's no real good way to mitigate dice luck. And in this game, I think there's a really good mechanism for that in being able to spend dice to move things around in the rows to get the actions that you want. And if you play your cards right, so to speak, and put the right buildings down on your board, then you can really help with that and get the actions that you want almost every turn. And so it is sort of an engine building game where you're sort of trying to build things up to be able to either get a lot of resources to get those trade ships, or get a lot of army points to be able to kill the bandits and to get those cards. But I sort of have found that in a lot of games that we've played of this, that you get into sort of a rut sometimes. It's really fun to get resources and it's fun to buy things, but sometimes you can get into sort of a cycle of doing that, of getting resources and buying cards and putting them on your board so that they give you more resources so you can buy more cards, but you're not really driving towards the conclusion of the game, which is to either get the trade ships or get the bandit cards to end the game. And so in our games, we sort of have found that that happens sometimes. So you sort of have to be aware of that. Also, I think this game plays best with 2 or 3. Actually shines really well as a 2-player game, I think, and good with 3, not so great with 4. I think with 4 it gets really long, and if you have any players that are prone to analysis paralysis, it can be very long while you're waiting for 3 other players to figure out what they're going to do with their dice. So that's kind of a down point in the game, but I think with 2 or 3 players it's really not too bad. Also, I find that the attacking mechanism where you can attack other players is kind of underutilized. I just sort of found that the army points that you have, they sometimes can be more valuable for attacking bandits than for attacking other players, because you're not taking their building off the board, you're just deactivating it, and you're getting some victory points, but it never seemed like the best option for me, and nor with any of the people in my group either. They never seemed to choose the option to attack that often, so I'm not sure if that maybe was tacked on, but anyway. But I think it's a really fun game. I think it's a good sort of medium weight game, and I love the artwork and I love all the components to it. So I would give this a recommendation, but not with 4. So if you really like rolling dice and doing cool stuff with them, I would check out Dice City.